Welcome back to part 5 of our series where we are building an Excel add-in using the new JavaScript API. And in this particular one, we are doing the custom function template. So this, along with giving us the capability of building a task pane, we also can add custom functions that we can use inside of our Excel workbook. So pretty cool stuff. Last few videos, we were basically getting everything set up. We were talking about the different templates that were out there. We were talking about the manifest file more than we probably ever will want to. But we also understand that the manifest file at this point is very, very important, and it's very easy to break your add-in by simply changing a single line in your manifest file. So with the manifest file, we now have created our little tab on our ribbon. We have our little group with a little button, and that button has a label and then an icon and all that kind of fun stuff, right? So now we're going to shift gears and we're going to start working on the task pane. So this wonderful guy right here. And with this one, the goal is, initially nothing too crazy in the sense of like, oh, we're going to make all this really fancy stuff that's just going to look phenomenal. We have plenty of time to do that. At this point, we want to make sure we understand kind of just how to modify it in a very basic setting. And then we're also going to cover adding a particular function. So I will elaborate what that function is once we get there. So with that being said, I have one more thing, and then we're going to start coding. So if you haven't already, I did upload this particular project to my GitHub. So if you do want to clone it and follow along, by all means, go right ahead. I'm not going to necessarily promise it's going to work perfectly, but I have made it where at least I think you should have at least a bare bones minimum working version. And as I make changes, you should then be able to see those changes as well. So a nice, wonderful template that you can build off. So again, you would just download it like as is. And then on top of that, when you are inside of Visual Studio Code, you will more than likely, once you clone it, you'll want to do an npm install, because there's a lot of dependencies that go along with this particular project. And so if you don't do an npm install, you're not going to have any of the node modules necessary. The reason I didn't push the node modules up to GitHub is there's a ton of them. So if you basically think about all the different libraries that you normally would have, like in Python, for example, well, now you have the node modules. So I don't want to do that. I think hopefully most people can just, from their terminal, do npm install, and then just like that, you're going to have all your dependencies installed. So it shouldn't be too bad. Okay, so with that, let's do the fun part, which is the coding part. Where did I put it? This is where I put it. Wonderful. So we talked about this a little bit, I think, when we created the template, but generally speaking, you're going to be working out of a couple different folders for the most part. For the most part, you're going to be working, at least in this example, out of the functions folder and the task pane folder. So the task pane folder, naturally, is related to your task pane. So what you're seeing here. So your task pane is related to your task pane folder, right? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to close my other one because I'm going to confuse the living daylights out of me if I have both of them open. So your task pane folder is related to your task pane. Now it's already pre-populated with some HTML code. That HTML code is being rendered on your Excel workbook. So what you're seeing here, this is the code that goes along with that. So if I change the code here, you should see changes in your task pane if you wrote the code correctly and if you wrote something significant enough to warrant an actual physical visual change. Now, HTML provides the structure of your particular add-in, right? The CSS is defining the overall look and feel of your add-in. So it's really defining the color aspect of it, the font aspect. It's basically giving the style to your particular task pane. So HTML provides the structure, the CSS controls the style. And then we have the TypeScript file. The TypeScript file is really dictating the interactivity with your particular add-in. So this is where you're adding that functionality component, right? Now in the basic template, it's pretty simple. We just have one function. It's called run. And when we run this function, it's going to grab the selected range that the user has selected. It's going to grab the address, or it's going to load the address property. And then it's going to change the fill of that selected range to yellow. And then behind the scenes, it's actually going to print something to your console saying range.address. So it says the range address was range.address, right? So this is not a function in the sense of an Excel function, but this is a function that I can bind to my task pane to maybe something like a button, right? In fact, you can even see that up here. If you go to the document get element by ID, what it's doing is it's saying, hey, inside your HTML code, there should be an element that has the ID run. Well, let's go and see if there is. Look at that. If I go down to line 48, you will notice that I have a div container, and it has the role of a button, but more importantly, it has the ID run. So this is a nice way for us to identify this particular div portion of it. And so what this is doing, not that one, what this is doing is say, hey, grab that div container, and on the click event, so when you click that particular little container, we want you to run the function that we have defined down below. So all you're doing is you're binding this particular action to that button, right? And up here is where we're defining that button. Okay, so that's at a high level kind of what is going on. Some of the stuff up here is more about, you know, making sure the style goes nicely. So this is more about making sure that the body is going to be flexible. So when you expand and extend it, it's going to make sure the text is as well. And then there's a side load message, and then it's going to be a display. So this is, again, something, if your app didn't run correctly, then that would go up there. Now, again, we also have our functions folder, and inside our functions folder, this is where we define all the custom Excel functions that we want to have part of our add-in, right? And so here we notice that there's a few. There's a function called add. It takes 2 arguments, first, second. They're both of the type number, and this function will return a number. And it's a very simple function. It just returns the sum of both of those numbers. Additionally, you will notice before every one of these functions, there's usually this little, doc string, right? This is actually a very important doc string. The reason why is this is what's going to kind of give you the, I don't want to say IntelliSense, but I'm going to say IntelliSense, the IntelliSense aspect of your Excel function, right? So this is going to make it where when the user uses your function, they're going to know, okay, this is my description. We know it's a custom function. We know that it has 2 parameters. One is called first, one is called second. This is the description of each one of those parameters. And then it will also return the sum of 2 numbers. So this is very important if you want to make it where people can use your function and not guess what they have to put in and what the type has to be and all that kind of stuff. Ideally, you can make your functions a little bit more user-friendly by providing these doc strings. Now, keep in mind, just because something is in here doesn't necessarily mean it has to be accessible by the user. So there are some functions in here, I think it's this one, that is actually not accessible by the user, because in this particular situation, it's not something that the user is going to directly access, but they can access this function by calling this increment function. So this increment function will actually get, oh wait, sorry, not the increment one. The clock function will actually access the current time function. So even though the user can't access this one, they're actually technically accessing it every time they call this clock function. So that's enough for functions. I actually have a whole video dedicated to that. So if you really want to go into details, There's lots you can do. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start modifying our task pane, right? So we're gonna make it where it looks a little bit more fancier than what it is. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change a couple things. I'm gonna say, okay, this is my Sigma coding add-in. Very important, you know, gotta make sure you got that brand recognition, right? Okay, now here's my body. So this is representing, if I had to put it in a visual perspective, it's basically starting right below that black line all the way down to that next black line, right? So that's encompassing my body. Now my body is actually made up of a couple different components. It's got a header, it's got a section, and then it's got a main section as well. Now the header is what you're seeing right here. And actually, if you look at the code, that should be pretty apparent because you're noticing, okay, it's got a header tag, says welcome. Well, that's matching up with what we see there. And then it's also got an image tag in it. So it's actually got an image in there that is what we're seeing in the task pane add-in. So I'm actually gonna snap this to the side just so that way I don't have to keep jumping back and forth. But I'm gonna move this over a tiny bit. I'm gonna try to do my best to make it a little bit easier on me just to make sure you can read it. Okay. So the header is going to define the actual look and feel of our header, right? So this is going to be our first section. This one, the section, this actually doesn't appear unless your add-in doesn't load correctly. So you would only see this one if your add-in doesn't load correctly. And then we have the main section. The main section is basically everything below that header. And you notice that the main section has a header to tag, right? And then inside of it, it's got this little unordered list. And that unordered list has 3 items in it. It's got this guy right here, which is the first item in our list. Notice that inside of our list item, we have an icon. And we also have some text, which is having a certain font. And we'll talk more about what all this means later. So it's got 3 different items in it. And then finally, after our unordered list, we have a paragraph tag. And then we have our div container, which is supposed to represent our quote unquote button, right? So this is where when the user clicks this, it actually interacts with your Excel workbook. So high level, that's how you need to think about this template structure. Really, most of the time when you want to change the physical structure of this, you would go to the HTML. Now, here's the other big thing, and I've been putting this off because I really didn't want to talk about it because I know it's probably just going to confuse people more than it's going to help people. The big issue with this is I'm technically using a slightly older version of what they want you to use, and not necessarily want you to use, but it's more of they've been doing a lot of updating in the form of merging some content that Microsoft has, because a lot of this is actually Microsoft's own personal library of components. It's called Fluent UI, and they basically make your job of creating these things a lot easier by pre-building a lot of the different components like buttons and drop downs and stuff like that. And on top of that, they also a lot of styling stuff too, right? So they've been making a lot of changes in the sense of these were made March. And so this particular one does not use React or really anything kind of like that per se. I mean, maybe behind the scenes it does, but we're not writing any actual like React files that would be importing different React modules and stuff like that. We're actually going to just be editing everything through the pure HTML. When we do get to that point, when we're going to start talking about a React app, that's kind of its own separate beast. I think it's important to kind of see this one first, because I think that one, when you see this, the other stuff will make a little bit more sense. So bear with me. I know for some people, you might be seeing different things on documentation. Keep in mind that's probably because it's probably for the React version of it. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is I'm going to start modifying my header, right? So I'm gonna say, okay, Sigma coding Excel, all right? No, that's kind of neat, right? So it automatically changes it right here. That's awesome that it does that. I think that is so cool. And then I'm gonna check my assets, Sigma filled. Okay, so I'm going to change my icon. I want my icon to be sigma filled. Great. You know what? I really don't like this background, right? So how do I change my background? There's different ways of doing it, but I usually like to follow the theme aspect of it. And you will notice that Microsoft actually has a lot of different themes pre-built into our wonderful template. And that's actually denoted right up here. So the first thing you want to know is that this one right here is your kind of your class. So this defines your class. And this is kind of a nice way of easily identifying something that has this particular tag. And then on top of that, you will notice that this particular class has another attribute that goes along with it called background color neutral lighter. That is actually defining this background color. So if I change this, we should see our background change. I think it's dark. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better now. So this is a way where I can change the look and feel. So this is one way of changing it. Now, most of you are probably going, how in the heck did you know that that was neutral dark? Are you just memorizing this stuff? I wish. I'm not, though. If you actually go to the documentation, there is a lot of great information here. Something that's actually really cool is they talk about coloring. And so basically, Microsoft has a lot of these built-in styles when you install certain templates, and some of those are slots. And so there's actually a neutral section. It's not this one. I think it's the theme slots. Yes, it's this one. So this one actually, these are actually kind of like built into it. And so what you can do is you can actually reference these theme colors if you want to follow something that's a little bit more consistent. Now, I will show you at a later point how to create your own custom theme. That's kind of its own little separate beast. But in this tutorial, we're just going to follow the standard neutral colors because I don't want to confuse the living daylights out of myself, because I will if I start doing that stuff. But this is where I basically find the name, and then usually it's Microsoft background color, and then it's the name of your slot. So if I did theme darker, for example, where is it? If I did theme darker, then we should see that dark blue. So that's really the idea behind it, right? Okay, so that is our background color. Let's move on to our, what are we gonna move on to? Our header. So just to kind of give you some variety, to modify my header, I am gonna use the CSS file. So I'm gonna go to my task pane CSS file. And then from here, you're not actually gonna see anything because it's not here yet, but I wanna modify my header one tag. So an easy way of doing that is we can just select it using the CSS file. So an easy way to do that is we actually call our, basically our welcome header class tag. And then from here, what I can do is I can say, okay, I want the H1 tag that belongs in this particular welcome header tag, right? So I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna select my H1 tag, and then I'm gonna say my color. And then my color is gonna be FFF. There we go. And so now we've changed the text color of our add-in, right? So this is one way of selecting an element using the CSS file. There are many, many ways to do this. I don't know all of them off the top of my head. Some are more intuitive than others, but for right now, this is just one of those things you kind of just have to go along with it. I think I have a website I got it from, if I remember correctly last time. I'll try to put a link in probably the GitHub repo. I think it does a good job because, again, there's a lot of different ways you can select a particular element and style it. So it can be a little bit confusing sometimes, but just bear with me. It's not too bad once you kind of get comfortable with it. Okay, so at this point, we have now defined the header aspect of our add-in, right? So pretty basic stuff, nothing too crazy. Let's do a little bit more, and we will now move down to our main section below. So with this one, we are now going to talk about a certain topic, which is called grids. And so a grid is, again, just using another fabric component that Microsoft provides. I personally really like it because I don't know, for me, I see it as very intuitive. To me, when I look at it, I kind of go like, oh, okay, this like makes sense. You just do this, you just do that. And it seems to go pretty straightforward. And so basically with grids it's kind of built around like, keeping things very structured in the sense of like, okay, so you can basically break up your screens into individual little pieces. And so your grids are made up of individual rows, right? So you can think of a grid as like a table, and you have a grid. And so you have multiple rows going down vertically, and then each one of those rows can then be sliced into individual components, right? So that's really the important aspect of this, is that you're going to slice them into individual components. Now, there is a very big requirement, which is that when you do your grids, you need to make sure that everything adds up to 12, right? So if I go down vertically, if I have multiple rows, I need to make sure that each vertical, column in a sense, all adds up to 12. Now, this will make a little bit more sense when we start coding it. So to basically create a grid, what we'll do is we will do a div tag, bam. And then inside that div tag, we are going to have a class that is equal to ms grid. And then the direction will be LTR. So this means left to right. So that means as I add rows, everything will start on the left side and go to the right side. So any content is aligned to the left. And then as I add, it goes more and more to the right. So this is my grid. A grid can contain multiple rows. And so a row is defined by another div container. And so this one, we will call this class ms grid and then row, okay? And then I like to give it an ID just to make my life a little bit easier. And so we'll say grid overview header row. So this is my row. And now inside of a row is basically made up of individual columns. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy it from my other one because I don't want to. Oh, wait, I closed it. Oh, darn. All right, well, so much. We're just going to have to go with it. So it's going to be another div container. And then with this one, we're going to do something a little bit different. It's now going to be a class where it equals ms grid column, and then it's ms sm for small, and my small version will be 12 length. My medium version will be 12, and then my large version will also be 12. Now, again, how did I know this? I read my documentation right here. That's all. So we have a grid. A grid is made up of individual rows. Those rows are broken into columns. So once you've done that, you basically have a new row. And then from here, what you can do is you can start adding content inside of those particular grids. So say, for example, I want an H3 tag. I want it to have an ID, say, for example, that is overview header. And then I want it to be overview. And now you can notice that, look at that. We now have our wonderful little grid. So that's pretty cool, right? So I'm going to delete this one because we don't actually need it anymore. And then from here, we can actually make another grid if we wanted to. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this one and I'll just copy it, because at this point, there's really nothing I kind of need to do in the sense of making a second one. It's actually fine just the way it is. And then from here, we'll say this grid overview header paragraph row. We'll just call it like that, right? And then from here, this one actually can stay the same. This is actually fine. This because we're saying it's going to be the same exact length. And then from here, what we'll do is we will then add a paragraph tag. And then this one, I'm going to do a little bit different, which is class equals, and then it's going to be MS font color theme neutral. Okay. And then, no, not that. And then from here, I'm going to say, welcome to the Sigma coding add-in. With this add-in, you can use custom functions to unpivot data, split text, and make an API call. Woo, fun stuff, right? So now you can see here that we have our section and we have our little text. So at this point, I'm actually going to delete the rest of this. I hope none of you get mad. Now it just has to think. And then hopefully I didn't. Oh, wait, I deleted my main. I can't delete my main. Okay, so yeah, I know, don't worry about it. So right now we have a very basic add-in. It's got a nice little H3 header and some text in it, right? So next thing is we're going to add a button, right? So now we're going to add a button to our particular little section, right? How long have I been talking? Okay, I'm gonna do the button, then I'm gonna call it, okay? All right, grid overview, and then we'll call this our button. And then with this one, this is where I'm gonna start cheating. So don't be mad at me. And then I realized with this one, I might actually, I have it on Excel, so I can do it here. So this is where I cheat, but I promise it's all in good intentions. So I am going to put a reference link to basically a Fabric CSS file, and I'm going to put it in my header. And the reason why is this will give me access to more special formatting for some of my buttons, because otherwise the buttons are going to look ugly, and then nobody's going to want to click them, because nobody wants to click an ugly button. So we're going to have a button tag, and then this button tag is going to have a couple different components about it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give it a type, and that type is going to be a button. And then we are going to give it a class, and then this is where things are very important. So we're going to say Microsoft button, and then it's going to be an MS button. And then we want to make sure we do standard. So this is going to give it the look and feel of our button. Now, right now, there's nothing in it. So now we're going to say span, and then it's going to be class equals MS button label. Okay? And then it's going to be bam, and then it's going to be, what we'll call this, unpivot data, right? Now, we're not going to necessarily build that functionality in the button yet, but we'll show you how to do the custom function. So now I have a button. So when I hover over it, it changes its color. I've got my little header. I've got my little text. Everything seems to be doing nice and fine. Normally, it's never that easy, right? Of course not. Now, from here, I am going to show you just a couple different things. I think, though, Yeah, I'm gonna call it. Okay, so at this point, I'm gonna cut the video. So if you got any questions about some of the formatting aspect, just the HTML aspect, by all means, ask away. I hope I can answer it. Some of this stuff is a little bit new to me, just to say it nicely. But yes, if you have any questions, by all means, put them down in the comments below. Next video, we are going to talk a little bit more about the CSS, and then we are going to write our first function. And so that first function is going to be unpivoting data. So thanks again for watching. We will see you in our next video.